Welcome to Class Time, CSEC English Language. We're going to get straight into our topic for today, which is persuasive writing techniques. I'm Vanessa Francis. Let's begin. So, of course, persuasive writing. We know that entails convincing people, correct? We started the lesson last time I was here. Now we're going to get into the details behind it. So here are our objectives for today. So of course, you'll need to be able to discuss various persuasive techniques. You'll also be able to analyze examples of persuasive techniques and of course, create examples of persuasive techniques. So let's get into our first activity, deal or no deal. Look at this advertisement. Cozy, historic, Georgian-style country home, constructed with the finest organic lumber. 2 bedrooms, open living and dining room, high vaulted ceilings, real wood floors, polished by hand with Rexo red. Large detached kitchen with fireplace for grilling. Detached latrine makes it safe from toxins. Strong zinc roof with surround sound as it rains. Handmade patio grills designed for fresh airflow. Angled foundation posts for earth movements. Open-sided cellar for storage, dogs, and puss. 3/4 acres of lush vegetation and roadside view. Solar laundry dryer included on patio. Sale by bidding. Serious inquiries only. Now, if you look at this, you see that several different devices are employed. This person is trying to get you to buy this piece of property. Now, based on just reading about it, what are the things that pop out at you? Look at the different things that are mentioned. So they mention the size, they mention how the house is structured, they mention the different amenities available. So based on just hearing about this property, would you be convinced to make a deal? Hold on a minute. That is the property that you are buying based on the description. Now look at the house. Look at the description. Are those things truthful or not? It said, historic Georgian-style country home. It says, constructed with the finest organic lumber. 2 bedrooms, open living and dining. So if you look at the description, that was very persuasively written, and you look at the actual structure, it is quite accurate. There were no lies told here. So what you should understand is that when you are writing persuasively, your aim is to make something that is unappealing, appealing to whoever hears it or to whoever reads it. So keep that in mind as you go through any lesson on persuasive writing. Your aim is to make the unappealing very appealing. So, of course, we're going to look at various techniques now. First one, use of imagery. We saw that being used a while ago. So imagery, of course, is the use of vivid descriptions that appeal to various senses. You know your senses: sight, smell, touch, sound, and taste. So you're going to be writing any type of words or phrases that appeal to these various senses when you're trying to persuade your reader or your listener. So here's how you use imagery now. So it can be a powerful persuasive technique. So when you're describing various sounds, when you're describing various sights, smells, feelings, and so on, these can be very powerful in persuading someone to be on your side. It can also persuade by painting a vivid picture. So you saw that a while ago. Granted, the picture in your mind was different from the actual picture, I'm sure, but a picture was created, and that is what is important. So look at this now. Would you prefer prolonged exposure to noise pollution is bad for health? That is straightforward, that is factual, Nothing wrong with it. But look at the option. Speaker B says, prolonged exposure to blaring music, the blast of motor vehicle horns, and screaming machinery can negatively impact one's health. Look at the difference between these two expressions. They both are saying the same thing. Keep that in mind. There is nothing different about what they're saying. However, how Speaker A says it and how Speaker B says it, not the same way. One uses more vivid descriptions. Notice you have blaring music, blast of motor vehicle horns, screaming machinery. So that right there is appealing to sound images. You can hear all this noise that is being described by the first speaker as just noise pollution. And hint, hint, notice one is longer than the other one. So some of you who struggle to reach the word limit, yes, man. Look at this other example. Speaker A says, imagine having to experience garbage and raw sewage daily. Again, very straightforward, very factual, not inaccurate at all. It's quite accurate. Now look at what Speaker B says. Imagine having to wake up each morning to the repulsive odors of rotting garbage and noxious sewage. Again, a more vivid image has been created by Speaker B. Based on what Speaker B says, you are more inclined to actually smell these unpleasant odors than when Speaker A just says, experience garbage and sewage daily. Speaker A has not lied. Speaker A has given you the information, but Speaker B has actually given you something extra to think about. So it's not just imagine having to wake up to garbage and sewage. What you're waking up to? The repulsive odors of rotting garbage. So right there, that smell is doing something to you right now. And the noxious sewage, again, even if you don't know what the word noxious means, it sounds away like it sounds like it's something really bad. And you can always check the meaning afterwards. But based on how it is described to you, you're already aware that something very unpleasant about this situation. Now look at this next one. Speaker A says, global warming affects everyone. Not a lie, very factual. It is the truth. We have done the studies to know that that is true, and that is fine. But remember, your aim is to what? Persuade. So simply saying global warming affects everyone is not going to cut it. You need to delve in. So look at what Speaker B does now. The searing heat brought on by global warming affects everyone. So right then and there, you're not just hearing about global warming, you're actually feeling the heat now. When it says the searing heat, you actually start to sweat, you actually feel the heat, and if you live somewhere that is hot, then you of course will say, I understand what you are talking about, I see what you're saying. So bringing out the images in your writing can help to persuade whoever is listening or whoever is reading. Now, our next technique, using metaphors. So, of course, we have to start at the basics. What is a metaphor? Now, by now, most of you have been taught what a metaphor is. So think carefully. What do you remember? You know that it does something, and it does this thing in a particular way that is different from two other things that do the same thing, right? Yes, ma'am. So the first thing a metaphor does is compare two things that are unrelated. So these two things are not the same. So you wouldn't compare one cat to another cat and call that a metaphor. No, because they're both cats. So two things that are unrelated. So that's the first thing it does. The next thing, though, that is important, even though these two things are not the same, they're unrelated, they do share a particular feature. So whatever you are comparing is similar in both of them. So if you compare a cat to a tree by saying the cat sat still or the cat was a tree, then you are somehow comparing the stillness of the cat to the stillness of a tree, because you said the cat sat still in one sense, or the cat was a tree. In that sense, now you're conjuring up the picture of a tree and thinking of the cat, and how is the cat like a tree? So you have compared two things that are not related, but they do share something in common. The next thing that you do with a metaphor now is that you imply this comparison. So you're not saying the cat was like a tree. That is more direct, and that is another device entirely. So when you say the cat was a tree, you are implying now that there is something about a tree that is similar to a cat and vice versa. Now, how do you go about using the metaphor when you are writing persuasively? So here are some things that you have to take note of. So a metaphor now can paint a word picture, meaning whenever somebody is reading or listening to this, an image will pop up in their mind. They will see something. Something will come up while they are reading or while they are listening to you. So you are making a point, and you're making a vivid point by painting a picture with your words. Now, what you are striving for in the exam is to make sure that you look very sophisticated and you look very well spoken. So you're trying to ensure while you're writing that you're making sure that your examiner, your audience, knows that you know a little something about something. Now, when you use a metaphor at the beginning of the writing, what happens is that it focuses. So it acts like a camera lens. So it puts everything in focus. So when you use the metaphor now, your audience starts thinking about that metaphor, and then the different connections now start being made. The next thing now is that the audience now is going to link the argument back to your metaphor. So when you make your little persuasive argument and you use the metaphor, that metaphor now acts as like a guide to help your audience see where you're going, see what you're trying to say. Now, of course, we're going to compare again. So look at this. Education is important in advancing society. Now, you think of a way you can express the same idea, but not in this way. You're going to express the same idea using a metaphor. Think about it carefully. You have one ready? All right, I'll show you mine. So the metaphor that you could have used, education is the engine that powers the propellers of society, allowing us to soar to limitless heights. You have still said education is important in advancing society. Both those statements are the same, but one uses a metaphor instead of just using direct language. And remember again, if you look, one is also longer than the other one in case you have struggles reaching the minimum word limit. So here's another one for you to think about. Those who have something to live for do not put their lives at risk unnecessarily. That is quite so. You have your metaphor ready yet? Those who have something to live for do not put their lives at risk unnecessarily. All right, let's see what Speaker B says. Men court not death where there are sweets still left in life to taste. My God, look how beautifully written that is. So you have one that is very straightforward, which is fine if that is what you're going for. But you have one that will give your reader pause, give your reader something to think about. And this one is more poetic sounding as well. All right, look at this one now. Although making money is important, we must remember the less fortunate. Think of a metaphor that goes with that now. Although making money is important, we must remember the less fortunate. Look at this metaphor. In capitalism, money is the lifeblood of society, but charity is the soul. Same idea being conveyed in both statements. Same idea. However, one has done so in a more poetic manner, in a more creative manner. And this is what you need to strive for when writing persuasively. Keep in mind, it's not just about the facts you have and the points you have. You are being graded for how well you can put it forward persuasively. So telling 10 lists of facts, wonderful. But have you persuasively presented this 10 list of facts? So now we're going to look at the use of simile. Sometimes we get simile and metaphor confused. So hopefully after today, we'll have a clearer picture to work with. All right, so now the simile also, just like the metaphor, also compares two unrelated things. However, where it differs from the metaphor is that it uses like or as to do this. So it does the same thing as a metaphor, compares two things that are unrelated, but it does it more directly. So it uses like or as in this comparison. So let's see how we can use it now when you're persuading. So this covert, meaning direct comparison, helps to make little relationships very clear in the reader's mind. And sometimes it makes it more relatable to the reader. So when you say something is like something else, they can see that connection clearly because they know the second thing or they know the first thing. So the other point becomes something that they can understand better. Because remember now, even though you're trying to persuade, you also want to ensure that the audience understands where you're going and what you're doing. You don't want to lose your audience along the way. So you shouldn't end up in Egypt and they are still stuck somewhere in China. Now, the nature of the comparison can also add humor. So depending on what you're comparing, you can use your simile to add some humor. And humor is a very good thing to incorporate in your argument. It doesn't have to be serious all the time. You can inflect some humor, you can inject some humor in there. And of course, the simile is going to help to emphasize the point you're making. So keep that in mind, it's very important. So here we go again. So Speaker A says, we are not expected to fight for our rights. Speaker B decides to use a simile instead. We are expected to meekly accept whatever offer is foisted upon us as lambs accept slaughter. Two things being compared, lambs going off to be slaughtered, unfortunately, and us, the people, being forced to accept something that we don't necessarily want. So again, the two speakers have made the same point. The point did not change from Speaker A to Speaker B. However, Speaker B managed to use a simile to bring that point across, managed to use a simile to make it somewhat more vivid to whoever is listening or whoever is reading. Let's look at this other comparison now. Education is important in advancing society. I'm a teacher, I had to throw that in there, I'm sorry. And Speaker B says, a society lacking in education is like a garden lacking water. Now, the typical person understands that for a garden to thrive, for a garden to flourish, you need to water it. So if you don't water it, what's going to happen? It's going to dry up, the flowers will die, perhaps the ground will become very hard, maybe you can't even plant anything after a while. So that comparison is something that they can relate to and now understand the importance of education to society. Because if a garden doesn't get water, it will die out. So if a society is uneducated, bingo, it will die out too. Our next comparison. Children can be taught many things. And the simile Speaker B uses, a child's mind is as fertile as an oasis. From we were tiny tots growing up, we always heard that an oasis is what? A fertile spot in the desert. So we know that an oasis has trees, some sort of vegetation, maybe a water source as well, which is why it has the vegetation. So if you're going to compare a child's mind to an oasis, then you understand that the child's mind is fruitful. It has much potential. So if you fertilize it, if you treat it well, it will flourish, just like an oasis. Now, one of the devices that many people overlook, the use of pun. So of course, the next thing we've always been taught, what is a pun? A play on words. So when you're playing on words, you're basically having a witty way of expressing yourself. So you're expressing yourself in a way that shows a little cheek sometimes, shows a little wit sometimes, shows a little intelligence, a little higher level of intelligence sometimes. But the pun can be used to persuade as well. And this is how we're going to do it. So, usually, it is used to inject some humor. Remember I said earlier, humor isn't a bad thing. Sometimes in your presentations, it gets very, very serious. So you can lighten the mood a little with some humor. Tasteful humor, appropriate humor, but humor. So it employs words that have more than one meaning, or words that sound similar but have different meanings. And that is how you incorporate the pun. You're either going to use words that have more than one meaning, so your homophones, your homographs, your homonyms, those words. So let's look at some examples now. So racism is no black and white issue. Where is the play on words here? Racism is no black and white issue. So it's playing on the expression black and white. We know black and white, we know black and white to mean something that is straightforward. But in terms of racism, racism usually is a conflict between one race that is described as being black and one race that is described as being white. So the two meanings, the literal and the metaphorical meaning, come into play. So the whole idea is there's nothing straightforward about racism, even though racism really is something that is black versus white, or any two races that you can think of. It's not always black and white, but that's the most common one that we associate with it. Now look at this one. Guerrilla warfare is more than just throwing a banana. Where's the pun there? Where's the play on words? What is happening? What you playing with? Guerrilla warfare is more than just throwing a banana. Now, it's playing on the sound of a particular word. So guerrilla, which is a type of warfare, type of combat, and gorilla, that great big animal that we know in the ape family. So that is where the play on words is. So this combat is more than just literally throwing a banana. It's serious because people will get hurt. People will possibly die. So the play on words here is not so much lighthearted, but it can still be appropriate depending on what you're talking about. Excuse me. Now look at this one. In order to complete an accurate study of obesity, a large test group is required. Where's the play on words there? In order to complete an accurate study of obesity, a large test group is required. Now, the word large. So you have large as in many different people, and you also have large as in the size of the people. So that is where the play on words comes in. Repetition. Now, repetition, of course, is one of those excellent devices to use. And here is why. So keywords, phrases, sentences, or concepts are repeated. So like the name suggests, you're going to say something over and over again. And the use now, you're always told it's used to emphasize, to reinforce, to drive home a point. So speaker A says, the community is negatively affected by the prolonged lack of piped water. But look at how speaker B puts it. Because of the lack of water, everyone in the community is suffering, suffering, suffering. So we have repeated the word suffering for emphasis to show the extent to which these people are not feeling at all like they're being on top of the world right now. So that's one way to use repetition. Look at this example now. It is wrong to show any form of prejudice, which is true. Now look at how speaker B puts it. Racial profiling is not right. Classism is not right. Gender bias is not right. Ageism is not right. Prejudice in any form is not right. So the phrase is not right has been repeated. And by saying it over and over and over again, it's like you're driving home the point to whoever is listening. It's not right, it's not right, it's not right. Now look at this one. For productivity to continue and the company to thrive, employees must be paid fair wages. Wonderful statement. Nothing wrong with it. But of course, we have to look at a different way you could put it forward. Now look at this. Fair wages make productive employees. Productive employees make successful companies. Successful companies make huge profits. So what you have done here, you have repeated a section of the previous sentence in the new one. So you're connecting them, and it's like a building on top of it. And there's something else that you have done with this one and the one before. This is also an example of parallelism, which is when you not necessarily repeat words or phrases, which we have here, but you also can repeat the way the sentence is structured. So how the sentence is structured has been repeated. So you can think about that as well when you're doing repetition. Now, of course, the use of, and please pronounce this word correctly, hyperbole. Say it with me. Hyperbole. All right. Which is also known as exaggeration. So it is an overstatement. It is a gross exaggeration. It is the one that will tell you things that are way above and beyond actual fact. So you have more or less blown something out of proportion when you use this particular device. Now, of course, if you're going to blow something out of proportion, you're doing it for the purpose of emphasis. So you're trying to emphasize something. You're trying to make sure that your audience can't vividly see what the issue is. So you're not just going to say it as it is, you're going to maximize it, you're going to elevate it, you're going to explode with it. So let's look how Speaker A says. The people of Parkerville are very sad at the poor representation they have received. So we understand the people of Parkerville are disgruntled. Now Speaker B says, billions of tears have been shed among the people of Parkerville due to their representatives' broken promises. No. Billions of tears. Did they go and count every single tear that fell? How many people live in Parkerville? And for how long have these people been crying that they have shed billions of tears? But the idea being conveyed is that these people are very, very disheartened. These people are not feeling at all as if they're being represented by the person they have elected. So by saying billions of tears have been shed among the people of Parkerville, we emphasize how bad the situation is. Now let's look at this one. The community is negatively affected by the prolonged lack of piped water. Possibly Parkerville we're talking about. We don't know though. Now, look at what Speaker B says now to grossly exaggerate the situation. From babies to old Mass Joe, everyone is crying out. Their throats are now parched due to the lack of piped water. So again, the same point is being made in both statements. Same point. However, Speaker A has chosen the more direct route, while Speaker B has chosen a more creative route. And in doing so, is perhaps going to be received a little better. Because thinking about these two statements, which one would more likely convince you that this community is suffering? Just saying that they're affected by the lack of piped water, or by telling you that everybody from the baby to the oldest man, them bawling out, their throats are now dry from both the crying and the lack of water. So right there, Speaker B has grossly exaggerated and emphasized the desperation these people probably feel. Social media is an important part of everyday life. That is what many of you would have us believe. And Speaker B now, to try and convince those of us who are still undecided on the matter, Speaker B will say, once you have experienced social media, you will not even remember what life was like without it. Again, gross exaggeration, because everybody can remember what life was like before. However, the point is, Speaker B is trying to show that it is so important that it's almost as if it wipes out every memory of whatever existed before. You remember nothing of the former time. So now let's look at how you can use alliteration. So what is alliteration? You should remember this. So you are repeating initial consonant sounds. The emphasis is on the sound. Now, keep in mind, there are various letters that make the same sound, and there are letters that make different sounds. So if you see the same letter being repeated in a word, or sorry, in a string of words, that does not necessarily mean that you have alliteration. What you need to focus on is the sound. So read it aloud if you are able to. Read it in your mind aloud, and you will hear the sounds coming out. So if you're hearing the same sound, then you have alliteration. But if you're only seeing the same letters, you might not have an alliteration working there. So of course, again, this one is also used to create emphasis. And you'll notice that quite a number of the devices and techniques, that is their purpose, to emphasize, to focus on something. So let's look at how it can be used. So we have on one side, candidate McNish has made several promises to the electorate. Factual statement, nothing wrong with it. Look at how Speaker B chooses to put it now. Health, happiness, hope, and high productivity are what candidate McNish promises to deliver. So this speaker now has chosen to use alliteration to list out the things that the candidate will do. And if you think carefully about it, it kind of helps you to remember too what this candidate has promised you. So candidate McNish made several promises. And what were those promises? Health, happiness, hope, high productivity. Now here's another example. Excessive criticism affects students negatively. Speaker B says the exact thing. You cannot expect students to flourish with constant criticism that causes them to fear participating. So Speaker B has chosen to use the k sound. So constant criticism causes them to fear. So right there, it even kind of replicates the feeling that you would get. Something digging at you. Now, we feel bad for those experiencing hardships. Again, very straightforward, very direct. However, sincere sympathies are extended to those suffering from various trials and tribulations. Right here, you have blended two different sounds. So you have the sincere sympathies and suffering, and then you have trials and tribulations. So right here, two different alliterations, two different examples of alliteration are being used together. That is fine, because you have the clear case of one and a clear case of the other, and they're both working together to emphasize what? That we feel bad for those experiencing hardships. So that's what you need to remember. Even though you have a straightforward way of saying something, your aim is to be persuasive. So your aim is to put it forward in a creative manner, in a way that makes it memorable, in a way that makes it have an impact on whoever is reading it or whoever is listening to it. Sarcasm, my darlings, sarcasm. What is sarcasm? I'm almost sure even if you can't necessarily define it specifically, we have all experienced sarcasm at some point or other in our lives, for some of us more than others. So it's a sharp statement, and this statement is usually verbally ironic or it's satirical. And by verbally ironic, we mean you say something, but you don't mean what you say. You mean something else. Now, be careful with using sarcasm because you don't want to end up in a situation where you are going to be seen as being rude. However, you can use sarcasm to add some humor to the argument. So again, you're making your statements, you're supporting your points, you've used other devices. So you can use the sarcasm now to break up the seriousness. You can put it in there to cause your reader to just say, boy, oh boy, something of that nature. And of course, the aim of sarcasm is usually to mock, to ridicule, or to express contempt for a person or a situation. So generally, you would use the sarcasm in a case where there is some kind of gross injustice being carried out. You can use it to show how unfair something or someone is, that type of situation. So you can use the sarcasm tastefully, remember now, tastefully, and very articulately, and effectively to show what you need to show and to make the point you need to make. Now let's look at these examples of sarcasm. So Speaker A says, paying good trainers is a much better use of funds than paying to retrain the cohort. Sounds very straightforward. Sounds very simple. Look at what Speaker B says now. The genius decision to allocate funds to correcting the results of poor training instead of paying competent trainers to avoid this in the first place needs to be applauded. Now look carefully at how differently these two speakers express the same point. So Speaker A, naturally, is saying, if you had paid upfront to get good trainers, then you would now have to find money to go retrain. But Speaker B now is not taking it so lightly, is not taking it so easily. Speaker B wants to point out how ridiculous it was to not pay the proper trainers in the first place. So when Speaker B says the genius decision, they don't really mean it was a good decision. They don't. And what you need to remember now is that for sarcasm to be effective, you had to have built a context for it. So when you're using sarcasm, it must be clear that you're being sarcastic. Unfortunately, there's a saying, sarcasm is lost on fools. Yes, that is true. However, if you build the situation, if you establish it, if you design the context clearly, then whoever's reading or whoever's listening can pick up that, hold on, something is wrong here. So when you say the genius decision, then they'll know that you don't really mean it's a genius decision. You mean that something was wrong, something messed up along the way. Now our next example, the rate of infection rises daily. Every day we hear on the news, more and more people. Yes, some of us are being very irresponsible. Hint, hint. Now Speaker B says, with each passing day, we marvel at just how high the rate of infection can rise. Now, when you marvel at something, it's usually something good, you know. So you marvel at the sunrise, you marvel at the beauty of nature, you marvel at birds singing, you marvel at children at play, you marvel at things that are positive. So how is it that you're using marvel to describe how you feel when you hear on a daily basis something as terrible as this? So again, Speaker B is being sarcastic. Speaker B is showing that it's not something to marvel at. It is something that you should really be looking at and saying to yourself, how can you fix it? Our next one, the official's point is unclear. The official's point is unclear. Speaker B decided to choose violence. I suppose if we search long enough, we might eventually find the point the official was trying to make. Now, dear me, look at these two statements very carefully. Are they different? Do they have different meanings? Did they convey the same idea? They did. But look how they conveyed the same idea. One speaker, again, very straightforward. The official's point is unclear. Whatever the official was trying to say, it went over everybody's heads. Maybe they didn't explain it well enough. We're not sure. We don't have a clue. However, Speaker B says, I suppose if we search long enough. Now, right there, setting up a situation that you understand the point is lost. Because if you have to search for it, it is not where it should be. It is out there in the mist and the mire. So if we search long enough, we might eventually find the point the official was trying to make. So Speaker B is pointing out very, very sarcastically that our official, whoever he or she is, that is trying to make a point in this context, we don't know if it's maybe a sporting event, maybe it was a football match, and the official called a certain foul, and nobody believes it's a foul, and the official tried to say, well, you know, this is what happened. We don't know what the point is. We don't know who the official was. But what we do know from both these speakers is that the point was very much unclear. The point was lost. And how it was put forward was different. So keep in mind, when you are writing persuasively, you have to ensure that you have the facts that you're going to include. So you have to have some details you're going to use. It goes without saying, you can't be making an argument and you don't have some details. However, the importance is not on just the details that you have, because let's face it, there are hundreds of thousands of you sitting this exam. Of that hundreds of thousands of you, quite a number of you are going to have the same 3 points to bring to the table. Now, of the hundreds of thousands of you, half of you have these 3 points, the other half has another 3 points. What is going to set you apart? What is going to make your essay different from John Brown's essay, different from Mary Jane's essay? You have to use your devices. So the only thing you can do for yourselves really is to ensure that you practice the use of your devices. Because if you don't, then you're going to sit in the exam and not know what to write and just basically do the default, which is just to write, yes, accurate statements, clear, straightforward, plain, lacking creativity, need I go on? So you want to ensure that when you're writing, everything that you put on the paper is serving a purpose and is enhancing your grade. Do not throw your grade away, please and thank you. You want to make sure every single word actually goes into what you want it to do, goes into proving the point you want to make, goes into convincing your reader. All right, so we are at the point where you're going to be using the techniques now to try and bring out different elements of persuasion. So here we have something for you to do. So you're going to think of a topical issue that you are passionate about. So start thinking, what do you like? What is something that stirs up your blood? People not wearing masks when they're outside, perhaps having to stay home and be at school from home, perhaps just not being able to interact with your friends, or something more global, anything at all that you're passionate about. Now, you want to create some persuasive statements using each of the techniques we discussed today. And you're going to try and do that now to win support for the issue you selected. So think about this. Something that you are passionate about, something that you are going to create some statements on. So you're going to think of a metaphor to use. Think of a simile to use. Think of repetition. Think of sarcasm. So think of each of what we have been doing. So here's the activity again. Think of a topical issue that you're passionate about. So it must be something that means something to you. And start writing. What are some statements you can use to persuade people about this issue you're passionate about? And you're going to try and incorporate the various elements, the various techniques that we have used so far. So, remember, so I'm thinking of something that I like. What do I like? I like education because I'm a teacher, of course. What specifically am I going to be talking about education? So, think of our current situation, this new normal that we keep talking about, right? So, my topic here is going to be, despite the circumstances, oh my, it's falling off. Despite the circumstances, we should not allow our children to fall behind. So despite the circumstances, we should not allow our children to fall behind. Now, think about that. Work with me now. What is a metaphor that I can use to bring across that point? Despite the circumstances, we should not allow our children to fall behind. So if you think back to what we did earlier, we had mentioned the idea of children being like what? You remember? Think back. An oasis. Good. So, can say our children's minds still need to be watered, or you can say fed, watered or fed. So you can have any of two ideas coming out. So you can have the idea of plants or the idea of human sustenance, right? So our children's minds still need to be watered or fed, although they are unable to attend school. So there's a lovely metaphor you can think of. So our children's minds still need to be watered or fed, depending on which one you prefer, although they are unable to attend school. So you're comparing children's minds to something that needs care, something that needs tending. Perhaps a plant, perhaps a pet, anything like that. Now, can we think of a hyperbole that will bring out this issue? Remember, this is the point we're focusing on. Despite the circumstances, we should not allow our children to fall behind. So let's think of a hyperbole to bring that out. So think about this. It would be a gross miscarriage of justice gross miscarriage of justice for our children to not benefit from education. In some way, shape, or form. All right, so here we have it. So we have used a simile and a metaphor. Let's cross out the ones we didn't use. Sorry, a metaphor and a hyperbole. And we have shown two different things. So we have said the same thing two different ways. Well, three different ways. So the original idea, despite the circumstances, we should not allow our children to fall behind. And we have used a metaphor to show the same thing. We have used hyperbole to show the same idea. So what you should understand is that when you are using the various techniques, they work together. So you can think of more than one way to say it and then choose the one you prefer, the one you think has the most impact, the one you believe has the most bite. So when you're writing persuasively, your aim, again, to persuade. Your aim is to ensure that all is well.